Marcus Thompson had always been the type of person who thought rules didn't apply to him. At 28 years old, he had built a successful social media following by pulling pranks and creating what he called epic content for his 2 million followers. His latest adventure had brought him to London, where he planned to create the most viral video of his career. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Marcus adjusted his expensive camera equipment. He had spent weeks planning this trip, studying the palace grounds, the guard rotations, and most importantly, the perfect spots to film without getting caught too quickly. His backpack was loaded with props, including several containers of brightly colored ice cream that he had purchased from a nearby vendor. "This is going to be absolutely insane," Marcus whispered to his camera as he began recording. His followers loved when he disrespected authority figures, and what could be more perfect than targeting one of Britain's most respected institutions? He had researched the royal guards extensively, knowing they were trained to remain completely still and emotionless no matter what happened around them. The guard standing at his post was Sergeant William Hayes, a 26-year-old soldier who had served his country with distinction for 8 years. William had joined the military straight out of school, driven by a deep sense of duty and respect for tradition. He had earned his position guarding the royal family through years of exemplary service, rigorous training, and unwavering dedication to his role. William stood perfectly still in his iconic red uniform and tall black hat, his expression completely neutral as tourists walked by taking photos. He had been trained to ignore distractions, insults, and even physical provocations. His job was to protect the royal family and maintain the dignity of his position, no matter what challenges he faced. Marcus approached the guard slowly, his camera rolling as he narrated his plan to his future viewers. "Check this out, guys. I'm about to do something that's never been done before. This guard thinks he's so tough, standing there like a statue. Let's see how tough he really is when I give him a little surprise." The tourists around the palace were mostly families with children, elderly couples taking photos, and respectful visitors admiring the historic architecture. They had no idea what was about to unfold before their eyes. Several people noticed Marcus with his professional camera equipment, assuming he was perhaps a legitimate filmmaker or journalist, documenting the changing of the guard ceremony. As Marcus got closer to William, he could see the guard's eyes focused straight ahead, completely ignoring his presence. This only fueled Marcus's excitement. He had pulled similar pranks on police officers, security guards, and other authority figures around the world, and the reactions always generated millions of views and thousands of dollars in advertising revenue. "The key to a good prank," Marcus whispered to his camera, "is catching them completely off guard. This guy has no idea what's coming." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a large container of strawberry ice cream, the bright pink color standing out against the formal setting of the palace grounds. William could see Marcus approaching in his peripheral vision, but remained focused on his duty. He had dealt with countless tourists over the years, some respectful, others less so. He had been spat at, had objects thrown at him, been insulted and mocked, but nothing had ever broken his professional composure. His training had prepared him for almost any situation. The other tourists began to notice something was happening as Marcus positioned himself directly in front of the guard. A few people stopped to watch, curious about what the man with the camera was planning to do. Some parents pulled their children closer, sensing that something inappropriate might be about to occur. Marcus looked directly into William's eyes, seeing no reaction whatsoever. The guard's face remained completely expressionless, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Marcus's head. This was exactly what Marcus had hoped for, the perfect setup for what he believed would be comedy gold. "This is it, everyone," Marcus announced to his camera, his voice filled with excitement. "The moment you've all been waiting for. Let's see what happens when I give this royal guard a little taste of reality." He opened the container of ice cream, the sweet smell filling the air around them. The crowd of tourists had grown larger now, with people pointing and whispering among themselves. Some were recording with their own phones, sensing that something newsworthy was about to happen. A few concerned visitors looked around for security or police officers, uncomfortable with the obvious disrespect being shown to the guard. William remained perfectly still, though he could sense the growing tension in the air. His years of training had taught him to be aware of his surroundings while maintaining his ceremonial pose. He could feel the eyes of dozens of tourists watching him, waiting to see how he would respond to whatever this man was planning. Marcus took a deep breath, smiled at his camera one more time, and then, without warning, reached out and smeared the bright pink ice cream directly across William's face and uniform. The cold, sticky dessert dripped down the guard's cheek and onto his pristine red jacket as gasps of shock echoed through the crowd of onlookers. The moment was captured in perfect detail by Marcus's high-definition camera, along with dozens of smartphones held by horrified tourists. The disrespect was so blatant, so shocking, that for a moment, everyone stood frozen in disbelief. Even Marcus seemed surprised by his own audacity as he stepped back to admire his handiwork, already imagining the millions of views his video would receive. Marcus Thompson had always been the type of person who thought rules didn't apply to him. At 28 years old, he had built a successful social media following by pulling pranks and creating what he called epic content for his 2 million followers. His latest adventure had brought him to London, where he planned to create the most viral video of his career. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Marcus adjusted his expensive camera equipment. He had spent weeks planning this trip, studying the palace grounds, the guard rotations, and most importantly, the perfect spots to film without getting caught too quickly. His backpack was loaded with props, including several containers of brightly colored ice cream that he had purchased from a nearby vendor. "This is going to be absolutely insane," Marcus whispered to his camera as he began recording. His followers loved when he disrespected authority figures, and what could be more perfect than targeting one of Britain's most respected institutions? He had researched the royal guards extensively, knowing they were trained to remain completely still and emotionless no matter what happened around them. The guard standing at his post was Sergeant William Hayes, a 26-year-old soldier who had served his country with distinction for 8 years. William had joined the military straight out of school, driven by a deep sense of duty and respect for tradition. He had earned his position guarding the royal family through years of exemplary service, rigorous training, and unwavering dedication to his role. William stood perfectly still in his iconic red uniform and tall black hat, his expression completely neutral as tourists walked by taking photos. He had been trained to ignore distractions, insults, and even physical provocations. His job was to protect the royal family and maintain the dignity of his position, no matter what challenges he faced. Marcus approached the guard slowly, his camera rolling as he narrated his plan to his future viewers. "Check this out, guys. I'm about to do something that's never been done before. This guard thinks he's so tough, standing there like a statue. Let's see how tough he really is when I give him a little surprise." The tourists around the palace were mostly families with children, elderly couples taking photos, and respectful visitors admiring the historic architecture. They had no idea what was about to unfold before their eyes. Several people noticed Marcus with his professional camera equipment, assuming he was perhaps a legitimate filmmaker or journalist, documenting the changing of the guard ceremony. As Marcus got closer to William, he could see the guard's eyes focus straight ahead, completely ignoring his presence. This only fueled Marcus's excitement. He had pulled similar pranks on police officers, security guards, and other authority figures around the world, and the reactions always generated millions of views and thousands of dollars in advertising revenue. "The key to a good prank," Marcus whispered to his camera, "is catching them completely off guard. This guy has no idea what's coming." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a large container of strawberry ice cream, the bright pink color standing out against the formal setting of the palace grounds. William could see Marcus approaching in his peripheral vision, but remained focused on his duty. He had dealt with countless tourists over the years, some respectful, others less so. He had been spat at, had objects thrown at him, been insulted and mocked, but nothing had ever broken his professional composure. His training had prepared him for almost any situation. The other tourists began to notice something was happening as Marcus positioned himself directly in front of the guard. A few people stopped to watch, curious about what the man with the camera was planning to do. Some parents pulled their children closer, sensing that something inappropriate might be about to occur. Marcus looked directly into William's eyes, seeing no reaction whatsoever. The guard's face remained completely expressionless, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Marcus's head. This was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. The perfect setup for what he believed would be comedy gold. "This is it, everyone," Marcus announced to his camera, his voice filled with excitement. "The moment you've all been waiting for. Let's see what happens when I give this royal guard a little taste of reality." He opened the container of ice cream, the sweet smell filling the air around them. The crowd of tourists had grown larger now, with people pointing and whispering among themselves. Some were recording with their own phones, sensing that something newsworthy was about to happen. A few concerned visitors looked around for security or police officers, uncomfortable with the obvious disrespect being shown to the guard. William remained perfectly still, though he could sense the growing tension in the air. His years of training had taught him to be aware of his surroundings while maintaining his ceremonial pose. He could feel the eyes of dozens of tourists watching him, waiting to see how he would respond to whatever this man was planning. Marcus took a deep breath, smiled at his camera one more time, and then, without warning, reached out and smeared the bright pink ice cream directly across William. The silence that followed Marcus's action was deafening. For several seconds, the entire courtyard seemed frozen in time as tourists processed what they had just witnessed. Children stared with wide eyes. Parents covered their mouths in shock, and elderly visitors shook their heads in disgust. The bright pink ice cream continued to drip slowly down William's face, staining his immaculate uniform. William Hayes stood motionless, his training taking over completely. Despite the cold ice cream sliding down his cheek and the humiliation burning in his chest, his face remained expressionless. His military discipline was absolute. He would not break character no matter what indignities he faced. This was his duty, his honor, and he would not let one foolish tourist destroy years of dedicated service. Marcus stepped back, his camera still rolling as he captured every detail of the aftermath. He expected chaos, shouting, maybe even the guard breaking his stoic pose to chase him away. Instead, he found himself facing something he hadn't anticipated: complete and utter silence from his victim, and looks of pure disgust from everyone around him. "Did you see that?" Marcus whispered excitedly into his camera, though his voice carried across the quiet courtyard. "This guy is literally covered in ice cream, and he's still just standing there like nothing happened. This is going to break the internet." He seemed genuinely amazed by William's self-control, but completely oblivious to the growing anger of the tourists surrounding them. An elderly British gentleman named Henry Morrison, who had been visiting the palace with his wife, stepped forward from the crowd. Henry was a retired military officer himself, having served in the Royal Navy for 30 years before becoming a respected teacher. He had seen young men like William throughout his career, dedicated soldiers who took pride in their service and deserved respect, not ridicule. "You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself," Henry said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "That young man is serving his country with honor and dignity, and you've just humiliated him for your own entertainment. What kind of person does such a thing?" Marcus turned his camera toward Henry, seeing an opportunity for even more dramatic content. "Hey, relax, old man. It's just a prank. No one got hurt. The guy's fine. Look at him, he's not even reacting. He probably deals with this kind of stuff all the time." "Just a prank?" Henry's wife, Margaret, joined her husband, her face flushed with indignation. "Young man, that guard represents centuries of tradition and service. He's protecting the crown, standing in defense of everything we hold dear, and you've treated him like some kind of street performer for your amusement." The crowd began to murmur in agreement with the elderly couple. Marcus could see that the mood was turning against him, but he wasn't concerned. Controversy meant engagement, and engagement meant money. He had faced angry crowds before, and security always eventually escorted him away while he played the victim for his cameras. "Listen, everyone needs to calm down," Marcus said, raising his voice to address the growing crowd. "This is 2025, not 1825. These guys are basically just tourist attractions anyway. I'm giving people what they want to see, real, unfiltered content that shows what happens when you push boundaries." A young mother named Sarah Chen, who had been visiting with her 2 small children, pushed through the crowd with tears in her eyes. She had been trying to explain to her children about respect, tradition, and service, using the royal guards as an example of dedication and honor. Now she watched as her 6-year-old son asked her why the bad man had hurt the soldier. "You've just ruined what was supposed to be a beautiful educational experience for my children," Sarah said, her voice shaking with emotion. They were so excited to see his face in uniform. The cold, sticky dessert dripped down the guard's cheek and onto his pristine red jacket as gasps of shock echoed. Through the crowd of onlookers, the moment was captured in perfect detail by Marcus's high-definition camera, along with dozens of smartphones held by horrified tourists. The disrespect was so blatant, so shocking, that for a moment everyone stood frozen in disbelief. Even Marcus seemed surprised by his own audacity, as he stepped back to admire his handiwork, already imagining the millions of views his video would receive. As Marcus continued his self-congratulatory commentary, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him, William Hayes made a decision that would change everything. His years of military training had taught him that sometimes the most powerful action is complete stillness. But they had also taught him when decisive movement becomes necessary. Still maintaining his ceremonial position, William began to assess his surroundings with the tactical precision of a soldier. He could see the exits, count the number of people in the courtyard, identify potential threats, and most importantly, he could sense the shift in the crowd's energy. What had started as shock was rapidly transforming into something much more dangerous for Marcus. Dr. Elizabeth Watson, a respected historian specializing in British royal traditions, had been conducting a private tour for a group of American university students when the incident occurred. As she watched ice cream drip from the guard's face, she felt a deep professional and personal outrage that surprised her with its intensity. "Young man," Dr. Watson called out to Marcus, her academic authority clear in her voice, "you clearly have no understanding of what you've just done. That uniform represents more than ceremony. It represents sacrifice, service, and a connection to history that spans centuries. The guard you've just humiliated has likely served in combat zones, protected lives, and dedicated his career to something greater than himself." Marcus turned his camera toward Dr. Watson, sensing another opportunity for dramatic content. "Oh great, here comes another lecture. Look, Professor, I get that you're all into the historical stuff, but this is 2025. People want real content, not museum pieces. This guard signed up for this job knowing he'd be a target for pranks like this." "A target?" Dr. Watson's students gasped at Marcus's callous response. Several of them began recording the confrontation, their academic interest in British culture now overshadowed by witnessing such blatant disrespect. "These guards are serving members of the British military, not theme park employees put there for your entertainment." The crowd continued to grow as word spread through the palace grounds about what had happened. Palace security had been notified, but their response was deliberately measured. They knew that overreacting to tourists often created more problems than it solved. However, they were monitoring the situation carefully as the mood of the crowd became increasingly hostile. Marcus remained focused on his camera, describing the scene for his future viewers. "This is incredible, guys. I've got actual professors giving me lectures, old people crying, parents acting like I traumatized their kids, all because I put some ice cream on a guy's face. This is going to be my most viral video ever." But William Hayes was no longer just a passive victim in Marcus's performance. As he stood motionless, his military mind was calculating angles, distances, and timing. He had served in situations where patience was essential, but he had also been trained to recognize when patience became a liability. The crowd's anger was building, and Marcus's arrogant responses were making everything worse. A group of British university students who had been visiting the palace recognized Marcus from his previous viral videos. Unlike the older tourists who were shocked by his behavior, these students knew exactly who he was and what kind of content he typically created. "That's Marcus Thompson," one of them announced loudly. "He's the guy who harassed those homeless veterans in Manchester last month, and who got arrested for vandalizing that war memorial in Edinburgh. He makes money by being horrible to people and filming their reactions." The revelation that this wasn't just a spontaneous prank, but the calculated action of someone with a history of targeting vulnerable people and important institutions sent a wave of fresh anger through the crowd. Parents pulled their children closer. Elderly visitors shook their heads in disgust, and several people began calling for security or police. Marcus actually smiled at being recognized. "That's right, I'm Marcus Thompson, and you're all about to be part of internet history. Make sure you follow me on all my social channels for more content like this." He seemed genuinely pleased that his reputation had preceded him, completely misreading the crowd's reaction. William could hear everything that was being said around him, and the information about Marcus's history of targeting veterans and memorial sites struck particularly deep. Many of William's friends and colleagues had served in combat zones, and the idea that someone would deliberately target them for entertainment filled him with a cold rage that his training helped him contain but not eliminate. The ice cream had now fully hardened on William's face and uniform, creating an uncomfortable pulling sensation on his skin. His eyes began to water slightly from the cold, but he maintained his perfect posture and neutral expression. However, inside his mind, he was no longer just enduring Marcus's prank. He was preparing for what would come next. A retired police officer named Tom Bradley pushed through the crowd, his experience in crowd control immediately recognizing the dangerous dynamics developing in the courtyard. He had seen situations like this escalate quickly, and he could sense that Marcus had no idea how precarious his position was becoming. "Son, you need to leave this area immediately," Tom said firmly to Marcus. "You've made your point, got your footage, and now you need to go before the situation gets out of hand. These people are not happy with you, and it's only going to get worse." Marcus laughed dismissively. "What are they going to do, give me stern looks? Call me names? I've been doing this for years, old-timer. I know how to handle angry crowds. They'll all forget about this in 5 minutes and go back to taking selfies." But Tom Bradley's experienced eyes could see what Marcus couldn't or wouldn't. The body language of the crowd had shifted from shock and disapproval to something much more dangerous. Fists were clenched, voices were rising, and people were moving closer together, forming what Tom recognized as the early stages of mob mentality. "You're wrong," Tom said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades dealing with volatile situations. "You're not dealing with your usual internet audience here. These people see you as having attacked something they deeply respect, and they're not going to just forget about it." William Hayes heard Tom's warning, and his military training kicked into high gear. He could sense the shift in the crowd that Tom had recognized, and he knew that his continued stillness was no longer just about maintaining ceremonial protocol. It was about preventing a situation that could spiral completely out of control. The tension in the courtyard had reached a breaking point when the first sign of karma began to manifest in an unexpected way. Marcus, still focused on his camera and completely oblivious to the dangerous mood around him, took a step backward to get a better shot of the ice-cream-covered guard. As he did so, he failed to notice the small puddle of melted ice cream that had dripped from William's uniform onto the ancient cobblestones beneath his feet. Marcus's expensive sneaker hit the slippery surface at exactly the wrong angle. His foot shot out from under him, and his arms windmilled wildly as he tried to maintain his balance. The professional camera equipment, worth several $1,000s, flew from his hands in a perfect arc through the air before crashing down onto the unforgiving stone surface, with a sickening crunch of breaking glass and twisted metal. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Marcus crashed heavily onto his back, his head striking the cobblestones with a hollow thud that echoed across the courtyard. For a moment he lay perfectly still, staring up at the gray London sky with a dazed expression as he tried to process what had just happened. "Oh my God," gasped Sarah Chen, the young mother who had earlier confronted Marcus about ruining her children's experience. Despite her anger at his behavior, her maternal instincts kicked in immediately. "Someone call an ambulance." He hit his head really hard. William Hayes, still maintaining his ceremonial position despite everything that had happened, watched the scene unfold with the trained awareness of someone who had witnessed combat injuries. He could see that Marcus was conscious but clearly disoriented, and he made a mental note of the way the man's pupils seemed slightly unfocused when he finally sat up. Marcus slowly pulled himself into a sitting position, his hand automatically reaching for where his camera had been. When he realized it was gone, he looked around frantically until he spotted the scattered remains of his equipment spread across the courtyard. The main camera body was cracked beyond repair. The expensive lens had shattered into dozens of pieces, and the external microphone lay bent at an unnatural angle several feet away. No. Marcus scrambled on his hands and knees toward the wreckage, completely forgetting about his potential head injury. "This camera cost me $8,000. The footage? All the footage was on there." He frantically gathered pieces of broken equipment, trying desperately to salvage something from the disaster. Dr. Elizabeth Watson approached cautiously, her academic composure giving way to basic human concern. "Sir, you need to stay still. You hit your head quite hard and you might have a concussion. The camera equipment can be replaced, but your health cannot." "You don't understand," Marcus said desperately, cradling a piece of his broken camera like it was a wounded animal. "This was going to be my biggest video ever. I had everything planned perfectly. The footage, the reactions, the controversy. It was all going to make me rich." The irony of the situation was not lost on the crowd. Marcus had spent so much effort humiliating William Hayes for internet fame and financial gain, only to lose everything in a single moment of cosmic justice. Several people were still recording with their phones, capturing Marcus's breakdown for posterity. Henry Morrison, the retired Navy officer who had first confronted Marcus, shook his head with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. "Son, this is what happens when you treat other people like objects for your entertainment. You built your whole scheme on disrespecting that young soldier, and now you've lost everything you were trying to gain." Marcus looked up from his broken equipment with tears in his eyes, finally beginning to understand the full scope of his failure. Not only had he lost his expensive camera and all the footage he had planned to monetize, but he was now surrounded by dozens of people who had recorded his humiliating fall. The very viral fame he had sought was about to happen, but not in the way he had intended. "This isn't fair," Marcus said weakly, his voice cracking with emotion. "I was just trying to create content. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. It was supposed to be funny." Tom Bradley, the retired police officer, knelt down beside Marcus with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with countless accident scenes. "Funny for who? You humiliated that guard in front of his workplace, disrespected an institution that millions of people hold sacred, and traumatized families who were here to enjoy a peaceful visit. What exactly did you think was going to happen?" As Marcus struggled to comprehend his situation, William Hayes made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. After standing motionless for nearly 20 minutes with ice cream slowly hardening on his face and uniform, he finally moved. Not to abandon his post or chase after Marcus, but to take a single step forward and speak in a clear, authoritative voice that carried across the entire courtyard. "Sir," William said, addressing Marcus directly for the first time, "I can see that you're injured and distressed. Despite what you've done to me today, I'm going to recommend that someone call for medical assistance to make sure you haven't suffered a serious head injury." The crowd fell completely silent at the sound of William's voice. Here was the man who had been humiliated, disrespected, and turned into an unwilling participant in Marcus's crude entertainment, showing more concern for his tormentor's welfare than Marcus had shown for anyone else throughout the entire incident. Marcus stared up at William in complete bewilderment. The guard's face was still partially covered in pink ice cream, his uniform was stained and ruined, and his military bearing remained perfect despite everything that had happened. The kindness in William's voice after everything Marcus had put him through was more devastating than any anger or revenge could have been. "Why?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why would you help me after what I did to you?" William's response was simple and devastating in its sincerity. "Because that's what service means. It means putting the welfare of others before your own feelings, even when those people have wronged you. It means maintaining your dignity and honor regardless of how others choose to conduct themselves." The contrast between the two men could not have been more stark. William Hayes, standing tall despite his humiliation, showing grace under pressure and genuine concern for someone who had treated him with contempt. Marcus Thompson, sitting in the ruins of his own making, surrounded by broken equipment and the consequences of his selfish actions, finally beginning to understand the true cost of his behavior. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as both police and medical personnel responded to the multiple emergency calls that had been placed by concerned tourists. Marcus remained sitting on the cold cobblestones, surrounded by the wreckage of his expensive equipment, while William Hayes had returned to his ceremonial position, the ice cream on his face now completely hardened but his dignity intact. Paramedic Janet Mills was the first to reach Marcus, her trained eyes immediately assessing his condition as she knelt beside him. "Can you tell me your name and what day it is?" she asked, shining a small flashlight into his eyes to check for signs of concussion. "Marcus Thompson," he replied weakly. "And it's Tuesday, I think. Look, I'm fine. I just need to save my camera equipment." There might be footage still recoverable on the memory cards. Even in his injured and humiliated state, Marcus's first concern remained his lost content. "Sir, you took a significant blow to the head," Janet said firmly. "The camera equipment is the least of your concerns right now. We need to get you to hospital for proper evaluation and treatment." She began performing standard neurological tests, checking his balance, coordination, and cognitive responses. Meanwhile, Police Constable David Roberts was interviewing witnesses and reviewing the phone footage that multiple tourists were eager to share. The videos showed Marcus's deliberate assault on the Royal Guard from multiple angles, his arrogant responses to the crowd's criticism, and his ultimate downfall in vivid detail. "This is quite serious," Constable Roberts said to his colleague, Sergeant Patricia Williams, as they reviewed the evidence. "Assaulting a Royal Guard is a criminal offense regardless of the suspect's claims that it was just a prank. The Crown Prosecution Service will definitely want to pursue charges." Dr. Elizabeth Watson approached the officers with several of her students in tow. "Officers, I witnessed the entire incident from the beginning. This young man deliberately targeted that guard, showed no remorse when confronted about his actions, and actually boasted about having done similar things to veterans and war memorials. This wasn't spontaneous misbehavior. It was calculated cruelty for profit." The testimony from Dr. Watson, combined with Marcus's own recorded statements about his history of targeting vulnerable people in sacred sites, painted a clear picture of someone who had made a career out of causing harm for entertainment value. The officers realized they weren't dealing with a simple prank gone wrong, but with a pattern of antisocial behavior that had finally caught up with its perpetrator. As the paramedics prepared to transport Marcus to the hospital, Constable Roberts informed him that he was under arrest for assault, public disorder, and criminal damage to a historical site. "You have the right to remain silent," Roberts began, delivering the formal caution while Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "This is insane," Marcus protested, his voice rising despite his head injury. "I barely touched the guy. It was just ice cream. You can't arrest someone for a harmless prank." But even as he spoke, he could see the phone cameras still recording his every word, capturing his arrest for the same viral audience he had tried so hard to impress. William Hayes watched the proceedings with the same stoic expression he had maintained throughout the ordeal. Several tourists approached him to express their admiration for his professionalism and restraint, but he remained focused on his duties. However, when a young boy named Timothy, who had been visiting with his grandmother, stepped forward with tears in his eyes, William's military composure softened slightly. "Are you okay, soldier?" Timothy asked, his voice trembling with concern. "The mean man hurt you, and I'm sorry that happened." The child's innocence and genuine worry touched something deep in William's heart, reminding him why he had chosen a career in service. William knelt down to Timothy's eye level, his voice gentle despite the ice cream still coating part of his face. "Thank you for your kindness, young man. I'm perfectly fine, and you don't need to worry about me. Sometimes people make poor choices, but that doesn't mean we should respond with anger or hatred. The most important thing is that we continue to treat others with respect and dignity, even when they don't show us the same courtesy." Timothy's grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Hughes, wiped away tears as she watched the interaction. "Officer, you've shown my grandson what true strength and character look like today. He'll remember this lesson for the rest of his life." She pressed a handwritten note into William's hand, thanking him for his service and his grace under pressure. As Marcus was loaded into the ambulance, still protesting his innocence and demanding that someone save his broken equipment, several of the tourists who had recorded the incident were already uploading their videos to social media. But unlike the viral fame Marcus had sought, these videos painted him as the villain of his own story. Klaus Weber, the German teenager whose livestream had captured the entire incident, read comments aloud as they poured in from around the world. "Everyone is calling this guy a disgrace," Klaus announced. "People are sharing the videos everywhere, but they're all supporting the Guard and condemning this Marcus guy. This is going viral, but not in the way he wanted." The hashtag #DarshRespectTheGuard began trending within hours, with thousands of people sharing stories about military service, sacrifice, and dignity. William Hayes became an unexpected symbol of grace under pressure, while Marcus Thompson became a cautionary tale about the consequences of prioritizing fame over humanity. News crews began arriving at the palace as word of the incident spread beyond social media. The story had all the elements that modern media loved: viral internet culture, respect for tradition, justice served through cosmic karma, and a clear moral lesson about the importance of treating others with dignity. Sarah Chen, still shaken by having witnessed the incident with her children, gave an interview to one of the news crews. "My children came here to learn about history and tradition, and instead they saw someone being deliberately cruel to a person who dedicates his life to service. But they also saw that actions have consequences, and that kindness and dignity will always triumph over cruelty and selfishness." As the ambulance carrying Marcus disappeared into London traffic, sirens wailing, the crowd began to disperse. But William Hayes remained at his post, ice cream still hardening on his face, continuing his duty with the same dedication he had shown before the incident occurred. His unwavering commitment to service, even in the face of humiliation and disrespect, had turned him into an unexpected hero, and Marcus into a symbol of everything wrong with internet culture's pursuit of fame at any cost. At St. Mary's Hospital in London, Marcus Thompson lay in a sterile white room, his head wrapped in bandages after being diagnosed with a mild concussion. The doctors had insisted he remain under observation for 24 hours, which meant he had plenty of time to fully comprehend the magnitude of his situation. His phone, which had been returned to him by the police after they had copied its contents as evidence, buzzed constantly with notifications he was afraid to check. Detective Inspector Sarah Blackwood arrived at the hospital that evening to conduct a formal interview. She had reviewed all the evidence collected from the scene, including dozens of witness statements and video recordings that showed Marcus's actions from every conceivable angle. The case was remarkably straightforward, but she wanted to give Marcus an opportunity to explain his behavior. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Blackwood began, settling into a chair beside his bed, "you're facing serious charges including assault on a royal guard, public disorder, and criminal damage to a historical site. These charges carry potential prison time and significant fines. I'd like to understand what motivated you to target Sergeant Hayes in this manner." Marcus winced, whether from his headache or the reality of his situation. "It wasn't supposed to be assault," he said weakly. "It was just supposed to be a funny video. I've done hundreds of pranks before and never got in trouble like this. I thought the guard would just stand there and take it, and people would think it was hilarious." "But Sergeant Hayes did just stand there and take it," Detective Blackwood observed. "He showed remarkable restraint and professionalism. The problem wasn't his reaction, it was your action. You deliberately humiliated a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces while he was performing his duties. That's not entertainment, Mr. Thompson. That's criminal behavior." The detective opened a tablet and showed Marcus some of the social media activity that had exploded around the incident. "Your actions have gone viral, just as you intended. But look at the response. Hundreds of thousands of people are expressing outrage at your behavior. Veterans organizations are calling for maximum prosecution. The video of your arrest has been viewed over 2 million times, with comments that are overwhelmingly negative." Marcus scrolled through the comments with growing horror. Instead of the supportive fans he was used to, he found page after page of condemnation. "Disgraceful behavior," read one comment with thousands of likes. "This man should be banned from all social media platforms," declared another. "I served with guards like this. They deserve respect, not humiliation from internet trolls," wrote a verified military veteran. "My sponsors are dropping me," Marcus whispered, staring at his phone as emails poured in canceling lucrative endorsement deals. 3 major brands have already terminated their contracts. My management company just fired me. My YouTube channel is being review bombed so badly that my revenue has dropped to 0. Detective Blackwood nodded grimly. "Actions have consequences, Mr. Thompson. You built a career on exploiting and humiliating others, and now you're experiencing the other side of that equation. The difference is that your victims never chose to be targets, while you deliberately chose this path." Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, the evening shift change was taking place with additional ceremony. Word of Sergeant William Hayes's professionalism under extreme provocation had spread throughout the military hierarchy, and senior officers had come to personally commend his handling of the situation. Colonel James Mitchell, commanding officer of the Guards regiment, approached William after he had finally been relieved of his post and allowed to clean the ice cream from his face and change his uniform. "Sergeant Hayes, your conduct today exemplifies everything we value in the British Armed Forces. You maintained your dignity, showed compassion to someone who had wronged you, and demonstrated that true strength lies in restraint rather than retaliation." William stood at attention, his uniform now pristine again, though he would never forget the feeling of ice cream hardening on his face while he chose duty over personal pride. "Thank you, sir. I was simply doing my job as I was trained to do it." "No, Sergeant, you did far more than that," Colonel Mitchell replied. "You've become a symbol of military values at their finest. The Prime Minister's office has called to express their admiration, and we've received hundreds of letters from citizens praising your professionalism. You've reminded the nation why we respect our armed forces." The story had indeed captured the nation's imagination, but not in the way Marcus had intended. News programs across the UK led with the story, framing it as a perfect example of dignity triumphing over disrespect. International media picked up the story, with headlines like "British Guard shows grace under fire" and "Internet pranksters' karma comes full circle." Dr. Elizabeth Watson appeared on the evening news to provide context about the historical significance of the Royal Guards and why Marcus's actions had struck such a nerve with the British public. "These guards represent a living connection to our history and values," she explained. "They embody service, sacrifice, and dedication to something greater than themselves. When someone attacks that for personal gain, it attacks the very foundation of what we hold dear as a society." The contrast between the two men's fates continued to grow starker as the days passed. William Hayes received commendations, praise, and recognition for his service, while Marcus Thompson faced criminal charges, financial ruin, and social ostracism. The cosmic justice that had begun with his slip on his own ice cream was completing itself through the natural consequences of his choices. In his hospital bed, Marcus finally began to understand the true cost of his actions. It wasn't just about the legal charges or the financial losses. It was about the realization that he had built his entire career on causing harm to others, and that karma had finally come to collect the debt he owed to the universe. "I want to apologize," Marcus said suddenly to Detective Blackwood. "To the Guard, to the people I upset, to everyone. I want to make this right somehow." Detective Blackwood studied him carefully. "Apologies are a good start, Mr. Thompson, but they don't undo the damage you've caused. The question now is whether you're genuinely remorseful or just sorry that you got caught. The courts will have to determine that, along with what consequences you'll face for your actions." As night fell over London, William Hayes returned to his modest flat, finally able to rest after one of the most challenging days of his military career. He had no idea that his grace under pressure had inspired millions of people around the world, or that his simple act of maintaining his dignity had become a powerful reminder that character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in moments of trial. Marcus Thompson, meanwhile, stared at the ceiling of his hospital room, surrounded by the wreckage of his former life, finally beginning to understand that true strength comes not from humiliating others, but from serving something greater than yourself. 6 months later, the contrast between the two men's lives could not have been more dramatic. William Hayes had been promoted to staff sergeant and was now training new recruits in military bearing and professionalism, using his experience from that fateful day as a teaching example. His story had become legendary within military circles, and he often received invitations to speak at schools and community events about service, dignity, and character. Marcus Thompson, meanwhile, sat in a small, cramped apartment in a rundown part of London, his life completely transformed by the consequences of his actions. The court case had resulted in a 6-month suspended prison sentence, a substantial fine, and a restraining order preventing him from approaching any royal property. More devastating than the legal penalties was the complete collapse of his social media empire. His YouTube channel, once boasting 2 million subscribers, had been permanently banned for violating community guidelines about harassment and harmful content. His Instagram and TikTok accounts met the same fate after investigations revealed a pattern of targeting vulnerable people for entertainment. The major social media platforms had collectively decided that Marcus represented everything wrong with internet culture, and they wanted no part in enabling his behavior. "I lost everything," Marcus said during a mandatory counseling session with Dr. Rebecca Foster, a specialist in behavioral rehabilitation. "My career, my income, my reputation, my friends, everything I spent years building was destroyed in a single moment of stupidity." Dr. Foster looked at him with professional compassion, but unflinching honesty. "Marcus, what you lost wasn't built on solid foundations. You created wealth and fame by causing pain to others. That kind of success is always temporary because it's based on harm rather than value. The real question is what you want to build in its place." The process of rebuilding his life had been humbling in ways Marcus never could have imagined. Without his social media income, he had been forced to take a job at a local warehouse, loading trucks for minimum wage. His coworkers knew about his past. The story had been too widely publicized to keep secret, but they judged him based on his present actions rather than his former reputation. "You know what the strangest thing is?" Marcus said to his therapist. "I'm actually happier now than I was when I was famous. Back then I was constantly stressed about creating content, worried about staying relevant, afraid that my audience would abandon me. I lived in fear every day, even though I looked successful from the outside." Dr. Foster nodded encouragingly. "That's a significant insight, Marcus. You've discovered that genuine fulfillment comes from contributing positively to the world, not from exploiting others for personal gain. How does that realization feel?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this point. "It feels like I wasted years of my life hurting people for no good reason. I keep thinking about that guard, William Hayes, and how he showed me more kindness in that moment than I had shown to anyone in years. He could have had me arrested immediately, could have broken character and humiliated me in return, but instead he was concerned about my welfare." The story of William Hayes had indeed become a powerful symbol of grace under pressure, inspiring countless people around the world. Books had been written about the incident, analyzing the psychology of dignity in the face of adversity. William himself had been invited to give a speech at the Royal Military Academy, where he spoke about the importance of maintaining one's values regardless of how others choose to behave. "The moment that changed everything for me," William told the audience of young cadets, "wasn't when that man put ice cream on my face. It was when I had to choose how to respond. I could have abandoned my post, retaliated in anger, or allowed his disrespect to diminish my commitment to service. Instead, I chose to remain true to the values I had sworn to uphold. That choice to maintain dignity in the face of humiliation is what defines character." One of the cadets raised her hand. "Sir, weren't you angry? Didn't you want to get revenge?" William smiled slightly. "Of course I felt anger. I'm human, not a robot, but I had been trained to understand that my personal feelings were less important than my duty to something greater than myself. The uniform I wear represents centuries of service and sacrifice. I couldn't dishonor that legacy because one person chose to act poorly." Meanwhile, Marcus had begun volunteering at a veterans support center, working with homeless former military personnel, the very demographic he had once targeted for cruel pranks. The irony was not lost on him, but it had become a source of genuine redemption rather than mere guilt. "I spent years making money by mocking people like you," Marcus said to George, a former Marine who had fallen on hard times after struggling with PTSD. "I recorded your pain for entertainment and never thought about the real person behind the camera. I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm trying to do better now." George looked at him with eyes that had seen too much hardship but still held compassion. "Son, we all make mistakes. The measure of a person isn't whether they fall down, it's whether they get back up and try to help others stand up too. You're here now, doing good work. That's what matters." The transformation in Marcus's character had been gradual but genuine. Working with veterans had taught him about real struggle, real sacrifice, and real courage. He learned that the men and women he had once targeted for pranks were heroes who had risked everything for their country, only to find themselves forgotten and abandoned by society. Dr. Foster observed the change in her patient with professional satisfaction. "Marcus, you've undergone a remarkable transformation. You've moved from causing harm for personal gain to actively helping others heal from trauma. How does that feel?" "It feels like I'm finally doing something worthwhile with my life," Marcus replied. "I spent so many years chasing fame and money, but none of that ever made me feel the way I do when I help someone get back on their feet. I understand now what that guard meant about service. It's about putting others before yourself, not because you have to, but because it's the right thing to do. The final chapter of their story came when Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Using his savings from his warehouse job and volunteer work, he created a small fund to support military veterans facing homelessness. He named it the William Hayes Foundation, honoring the man whose grace had started him on his journey toward redemption. When William learned about the foundation, he was deeply moved. In a letter to Marcus, he wrote, "Your transformation proves that even the darkest moments can become catalysts for positive change. You've turned your mistake into an opportunity to serve others, which is the highest form of honor. I'm proud to have my name associated with work that helps those who have sacrificed for our country." The two men never met again in person, but their stories had become forever intertwined, one representing the power of maintaining dignity under pressure, the other proving that redemption is possible for anyone willing to genuinely change their life. Together, they had created a modern parable about karma, character, and the possibility of transformation that would inspire people for generations to come.